The story I'm about to share takes me back several years, to a time when I found myself navigating the tumultuous waters of love and loss. I got divorced in 2011, but it all began years earlier when I was just 19 and still in my last year of junior college. I met my ex-wife, whose name was Angela, on a social media site called MySpace in 2006. Now, I know some people are going to shake their heads at me for this, but Angela was 9 years older than me. At the time, she was 28, and let me tell you, she was absolutely stunning. In her younger years, she had even dabbled in modeling, gracing the pages of magazines. On the outside, she was breathtaking, but as I would eventually discover, her inner self was a far cry from that beauty. From the very start, my mother had reservations about Angela, primarily due to our age difference. It took some time, but eventually, my mom learned to accept it. Angela didn't have kids when we met, but she often expressed her desire to settle down and start a family. I was okay with the idea of marriage down the line, but I made it clear that I wanted to establish a solid career before jumping into parenthood. Angela understood my perspective, but sometimes she would bring it up again, saying her biological clock was ticking. Her mother had her at 42. And her brother came along at 44, which made her anxious. I would reassure her, saying, "You'll be fine. Your mom had you late, after all." Despite these conversations, we began dating, and those early days were filled with fun and excitement. Angela introduced me to a world I had never experienced before. I had never been to a club or a bar, but she took me along, and I embraced it all. We traveled frequently, especially to Florida, and when I turned 21, we visited Vegas together for the first time. That trip was unforgettable. I won big at the casino, and we celebrated with a wild night of laughter and drinks. We seemed to balance each other perfectly. She was the outgoing social butterfly, while I was the more reserved guy, content to observe the world around me. In 2010, I asked Angela to marry me. When I proposed, she was thrilled, exclaiming, "Finally." I had fallen deeply in love with her and had never anticipated that our relationship would take such a turn. We married later that same year in a small, intimate ceremony. It was just the two of us and our parents in a tiny room with a judge, nothing grand, but it felt special nonetheless. For our honeymoon, we went to a beautiful resort in Arizona, where we enjoyed hiking in the mountains and created lasting memories. Right after our honeymoon, we immediately started trying for kids. But as the months went by, nothing happened. Angela was now 32, and I began to feel the pressure. She would get frustrated with me, snapping, "It's your fault. We should have started trying years ago. I'll never be a mother because of this." It was heartbreaking to hear those words. To ease her worries, I went to get tested, and my sperm count came back perfectly normal, meaning I could have kids. Angela also underwent tests, and while the doctor cautioned that having children becomes riskier as women age, he declared she was in great health. She maintained an impressive fitness regimen, working out daily and following a well-balanced diet. Her health-conscious lifestyle began to rub off on me, and for that, I was grateful. We continued to try for a child throughout that year, but each month brought disappointment. There was one time when Angela was convinced she was pregnant. She took multiple home tests, but they all came back negative. Undeterred, she went to see the doctor, insisting, "I know I'm pregnant." But the tests revealed otherwise, and that was the moment when everything changed for her. The frustration and disappointment morphed into anger, and Angela began to speak to me as if I were a child. She would talk down to me, making comments that cut deep, such as, "Why can't you be more responsible?" Or "This should have happened by now." The shift in her demeanor was jarring. The woman I had fallen in love with, who had once filled my life with joy and adventure, was now distant and resentful. The fun-loving spirit that had drawn me to her seemed to fade, replaced by a shadow of doubt and blame. I wanted to comfort her, to help her through this challenging time, but instead, I found myself on the receiving end of her frustrations. It felt like the love we once shared was being eroded by a mounting pressure to fulfill the role of parenthood. As the weeks turned into months, our arguments grew more frequent and intense. The house that had once echoed with laughter now felt heavy with tension. I couldn't understand why Angela had shifted so dramatically, and I was desperate to fix things, but every attempt only seemed to make it worse. I would try to remind her of the fun we used to have, the adventures we embarked upon together, but it all fell on deaf ears. One night, as we sat in silence in our living room, I looked over at her and saw the pain etched on her face. I knew that deep down, this wasn't just about having children, it was about her fears, insecurities, and the weight of unmet expectations. I decided then and there that I had to break through the wall that had formed between us. I needed to remind her of the love we shared and the life we had built together. I began to write her notes, small reminders of our journey and the love we once felt. I would leave them around the house, in her purse, on the bathroom mirror, even in the kitchen where she spent so much time. I wanted her to remember the good times, the laughter, the shared dreams, and most importantly, the love that had brought us together in the first place. Slowly, I noticed her reactions began to soften. She would smile faintly as she read my notes, and I could see a flicker of the woman I had fallen in love with peeking through the cracks of her distress. Despite the efforts I made, the road ahead was still rocky. We decided to seek couples therapy, hoping to bridge the gap between us and confront the challenges we faced head-on. It wasn't easy, and there were times I felt like giving up, but each session brought us a little closer to understanding one another. I learned to express my feelings more openly, while Angela began to share her fears and insecurities. We started to rebuild our connection, one conversation at a time. But as the months passed, I realized that the journey of healing was not just about finding a solution to our struggles with parenthood. It became about rediscovering each other, nurturing the love that had first sparked our relationship. Through therapy, we explored the depths of our individual hopes and fears, and in doing so, we began to foster a renewed sense of intimacy. Eventually, we reached a turning point where we could talk honestly about our desires and fears regarding starting a family. I reassured her that I wanted to be a father, and together we began to explore other avenues, including consulting fertility specialists and considering adoption. The idea of becoming parents began to feel less like a burden and more like a shared goal, something we could work towards together. Looking back now, I realize that those challenging years were not just about the struggle to conceive, they were about learning to communicate, to support one another, and to embrace the journey of love in all its complexities. Through it all, Angela and I discovered a deeper bond that had been forged in the fires of adversity. While our story didn't end in the way I had initially hoped, I carry the lessons learned with me. The love we shared transformed into something richer, more profound, and even though our paths eventually diverged, I will always be grateful for the journey we took together. The love that blossomed on that social media site all those years ago taught me about resilience, understanding, and the power of commitment. Life may not have gone according to our original plans, but the memories we created together will always hold a special place in my heart. I found myself in a constant battle with self-doubt. Deep down, I always felt like I wasn't man enough. It ate away at me that I didn't have a master's degree like other successful men knew. Those feelings of inadequacy crept in, whispering that I was less than, just a shadow of what I should be. One day, things escalated at Target. I accidentally rolled the shopping cart over the back of her heel. Cat exploded, yelling at me to watch where I was going. In that moment, I felt something snap inside me. I stepped closer, looking her straight in the eyes, and told her to stop speaking to me like that. It was an accident, plain and simple. She turned and ran out of the store, tears streaming down her face. I followed her outside, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of it all. Once we got to the car, she broke down again, crying and apologizing. "I'm just so frustrated with everything," she sobbed. I told her I understood, that the pressure of not having kids was weighing heavily on her, but that we would be okay. She apologized again, and we both took a deep breath, hoping to move past it. Kat then suggested we stop by an automatic car wash. She wanted to clean the car, but I had no idea that a simple drive through the wash would lead to one of the most intense experiences we had shared. Once inside, she surprised me with an incredible intimate moment, one that made me feel powerful. Afterward, she smiled and said she loved how I had put her in her place and wished I would do it more often. It was an odd twist, but I learned something important in that relationship. Sometimes, the lines of power and desire get blurred. However, the real issues lingered beneath the surface. Kat was desperate for a baby, and in October of 2010, she left her Samsung phone on the couch, pin set to the default, oh. I had never been one to snoop, but doubt started gnawing at me. The way she spoke to me felt off, almost dismissive. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing, so I decided to take a peek. What I discovered shook me to my core. There was a text thread with a guy I later found out was a teller at our bank. He was definitely trying to worm his way into her life, telling her she could do better than me and that he was the man for her. They were the same age, and it sickened me to read how she confided in him about her regrets for marrying me. She'd say things like it wasn't right for her to be interested in him but that she really wanted to. He sent her explicit pictures, and she replied with encouragement. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. When Kat came back from walking our dog, I was holding her phone. I confronted her, asking, "So, you like Tyrone, huh?" She demanded I give her the phone back, but I held on tight, asking if she regretted marrying me. Her answer cut like a knife, "Yes, I do." I was numb, and in that moment, I knew I had to make a decision. I tossed her the phone and declared, "I'm done. We're getting a divorce." To my surprise, she laughed. "Good. Please bring me the papers. I'll gladly sign them." Her casual dismissal hurt more than I expected. I kept it together as I packed my things, but inside, I was a storm of emotions. What was I thinking, getting married at 23? It felt like such a monumental mistake. Once I had everything packed, I drove straight to my parents' house. When I arrived, I broke down in their living room, sobbing like a child. My mom wrapped her arms around me, whispering that everything would be okay. Even now, years later, I can still feel that pain creeping back at the most unexpected times. I wouldn't wish that heartbreak on any man. In the wake of my shattered marriage, I realized I needed help. I had abandoned my friends, entranced by the spell Kat had woven around me, where she was my whole world. After the divorce papers were served, Kat signed them with a smile and sent me a picture of herself with the bank teller guy, proudly holding the signed documents. That image ripped through me. It was the final straw that drove me to seek therapy. My therapist was a 40-year-old man who became a lifeline for me. From the moment we met, he made me feel seen and heard. He encouraged me to pick up the pieces of my life and taught me how to rebuild my self-esteem, which Kat had systematically dismantled. Slowly, I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel, even as the shadows of that painful chapter loomed large in my memory. As I reflect on those tumultuous days, I realize they shaped me in ways I never anticipated. I learned about resilience, the importance of self-worth, and the value of genuine connections. Though the pain still lingers, it no longer defines me. I've learned to stand tall, embracing the journey ahead, determined to create a future filled with hope and happiness. He's a man of few words, but when he speaks, it carries weight. After the fallout from my marriage, he leaned in and said, "Pick your head up. This isn't the end, you have so much more to accomplish." His voice was steady, filled with conviction. He reminded me that she would eventually regret losing me, but instead of seeking revenge, I should focus on moving forward with my life. "Trust me," he said with a firm nod. "You'll come out on top." Finally, we got the divorce finalized in 2011, and I felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty wash over me. I knew I had a long road ahead, but I was determined to rebuild my life. I decided to go back to school, an idea that felt daunting but necessary. With sheer determination, I graduated with my master's degree in 2015. I could hardly believe it when I passed my professional engineer (PE) exam in 2020. Now, I'm a licensed engineer, and it feels incredible to say that. I'm proud to work for a successful firm that operates across the U.S., earning accolades for our projects. I hold a significant position there, and the financial stability I've gained is a huge part of my newfound independence. On top of that, I teach evening courses at a local college twice a week, sharing my knowledge with eager students. I know without a doubt that none of this would have been possible if I had stayed in that toxic relationship. I owe a great deal to my therapist, who has become a close friend, for igniting the spark within me and pushing me toward growth. It would have been easy to sink into a depression, wallowing in self-pity while she moved on with her life, but I refused to let that happen. A year after our divorce, I learned through my mom that she was engaged to someone new. It was a shock to hear she was pregnant a year later, but I found myself feeling oddly detached from the news. My mom ran into her at a church she was visiting and shared that my ex-wife had never ended up marrying the guy. Apparently, she discovered he had been unfaithful and had gotten another woman pregnant. I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication when my mom told me that my ex had been asking about me, eager to know how I was doing. It was heartening for her to hear all about my accomplishments, especially when she excitedly showed her the article featuring me in the local news, representing our firm. From what my mom said, my ex's eyes lit up with pride when she learned about my successes. It was strange to think about, but I was glad to know she recognized what I had achieved despite everything. Fast forward to now, I'm a father to a vibrant 3-year-old girl. She is the light of my life. The relationship I have with her mother, who I met in university, is solid and respectful, even though we were never romantically involved. She's a wonderful woman and a great mom. As for marriage, I've realized I have no desire to remarry. I've kept my phone number the same since I was 19, a small connection to my past. Recently, I received a text that shook me a bit. "Is this Matthew?" The message read. I responded, "Yes, who is this?" "Hey, it's Michelle." My heart raced for a moment. I felt a mix of curiosity and dread. "Michelle who?" "Your ex-wife, Michelle." "Oh, hey, ex-wife. Is it okay if I call you?" she asked, her tone almost pleading. "Why? What's up?" "Honestly, I just miss you," she confessed. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and I wish I had fought harder to stay with you. I'm so proud of you and wish I could have been by your side for everything you've accomplished. Things have been tough for me, and I could really use some help." I felt a rush of emotions, a blend of disbelief and anger. I replied flatly, "No," and without a second thought, I blocked her number. The nerve of her to come crawling back after everything. I had no interest in being her safety net or helping her pick up the pieces of a life she willingly walked away from. My focus was on my daughter and my own life, building a future that was mine alone. I had come too far to let the past drag me down again. I knew my worth, and I was determined to keep moving forward.